Imagine being so hungry, you do anything for a bite to eat. But what if, in that moment, you discovered a hidden genius? A young girl struggling to survive walks into a diner and asks for food in the most unexpected way. And what happens next will shock you. Stay with us as we reveal how a simple request changed her life forever. Trust me, you won't want to miss this jaw-dropping story. If you're ready for a twist you never saw coming, hit that like button and subscribe to the Black Visionaries family now. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in a city that never seemed to get a break from the gray skies. The steady rhythm of raindrops against the window pane could almost put you to sleep. But inside the small diner on the corner of Main Street, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the hum of quiet conversations. A woman in her 40s sat at the counter, sipping her coffee, her eyes glazed as she flipped through an old newspaper. The waitress was wiping down the counter, occasionally taking a glance at the clock. The usual morning crowd was scattered across the room, with nothing out of the ordinary happening. And then there was Lena. Lena, at just 15, was nothing more than a ghost in the diner. She always sat alone, tucked in the corner, far from the other customers. Her clothes were worn, not the kind of clothes a girl her age should have to wear. But she didn't care much about her clothes. They weren't going to help her anyway. She had no family, no friends, just a string of foster homes that never felt like home. The diner had become her refuge over the past few months. It was the one place she could sit without being judged, where people forgot about her and went about their own lives. That day, like so many others, she came in with nothing but a few crumpled bills in her pocket and a longing that weighed heavier than the rain outside. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her of how long it had been since she had last eaten a proper meal. The hunger was unbearable, a constant reminder of how little she had. But what was she supposed to do? She couldn't just ask for help. She wasn't one to beg. As she absent-mindedly traced her fingers along the rim of the chipped coffee cup, her mind raced. She didn't want to disturb anyone, but she didn't know how much longer she could ignore the gnawing feeling in her stomach. That's when she caught Jim's eye. Jim was the diner's owner, a gruff man in his late 40s with thick arms and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He wasn't unfriendly, but he wasn't the kind of guy to go out of his way to make small talk. He ran the diner and didn't concern himself too much with the lives of the people who walked through the door, but he knew enough about Lena. She came in nearly every day, and he'd noticed how thin she'd become over the months. He didn't pry, but he knew she was barely getting by. Lena hesitated before speaking, knowing how ridiculous her request would sound. "Jim, can I play for a piece of food?" Jim stopped wiping down the counter and looked up at her, his brow furrowing in confusion. Lena bit her lip, her voice barely above a whisper. I, I can play the piano. Maybe I can play something for you in exchange for food." Jim stared at her, as though trying to decide if she was joking. He chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "You want to play piano for food?" He wasn't sure whether to laugh or feel sorry for her. It wasn't that he thought she wasn't capable. It was just such an odd thing to ask. But there was something in her eyes, something that told him she wasn't joking. "Yeah," Lena said, her fingers tapping nervously on the counter. "I'll play. I just, I'm really hungry." Jim studied her for a moment longer, then shrugged. "All right. There's an old piano in the back. It's not much, but if you can play something decent, I'll give you a meal." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't touched a piano in years, not since she was a little girl, before the world had turned its back on her. But the thought of food, of something warm in her stomach, was enough to drive her to give it a try. She stood up from her stool, feeling a nervous twinge in her chest. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't want to back out now. As she walked to the back of the diner, Jim followed her, still skeptical, but curious. He had seen a lot of strange things in his life, but this felt different. Lena had something about her, something that made him want to see this through. The piano was tucked in the corner of the small back room, its keys yellowed with age, a few of them sticking when pressed. It wasn't the grandest instrument, but it was better than nothing. Lena sat down slowly, her fingers hovering over the keys for a moment as she tried to steady her breathing. She hadn't played in years. The last time she had touched a piano was at one of the foster homes she had stayed in. The keys had been out of tune, the piano old and neglected. But she had taught herself playing simple melodies she had heard on the radio or in movies. She took a deep breath and began to play. At first, her fingers were a little stiff, but as the music began to flow, she relaxed. The melody she played was simple, a haunting lullaby that had always stuck with her, one she had taught herself all those years ago. It was soft, gentle, the kind of music that made you forget about everything else. As her fingers glided over the keys, something changed. She wasn't just playing a song anymore. She was telling a story. The music spoke for her in a way words never could. Jim stood at the door, watching her intently. At first, he had expected a few awkward notes, maybe a clumsy attempt at something, but what he heard left him in stunned silence. Lena wasn't just playing, she was playing. It wasn't just the melody, it was the emotion behind it. The way the music seemed to wrap around the room, filling every corner with something warm and bittersweet. She wasn't just a girl playing a song, she was a musician. Jim's heart raced. He had seen many musicians come through his diner, but he had never heard something like this. He stepped closer, leaning against the doorframe as Lena continued to play. There was something raw and beautiful about the way she approached the piano. It was clear that this was more than just a request for food. It was her way of showing who she truly was. Lena finished the piece, her hands lingering on the keys, and for a moment, everything was still. She looked up, her face flushed with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. Her hands trembled slightly as she slowly pulled them away from the piano, unsure of what to expect. Jim didn't speak at first. He just stood there, blinking, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't just a request for food, it had been a revelation. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Lena shifted uncomfortably, looking down at her hands. "I taught myself," she said quietly. "I didn't have much, but when I found a piano, I just played." Jim didn't know what to say. "That was amazing," he finally managed. "You're incredible. Why didn't you ever say anything about this before?" Lena looked up at him, her eyes wide, not knowing how to answer. "I never thought anyone would care." Jim was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He was a man who'd seen his fair share of struggles, but this was different. He saw something in Lena, something he couldn't ignore. "You shouldn't hide that talent," he said, shaking his head. "You need to keep playing. You could go places with that kind of gift." Lena blinked, surprised by his words. She had never thought of herself as special, never thought she could be something more than just a girl trying to survive. But hearing Jim say it, he made her feel like maybe she had something worth fighting for. "Really?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jim nodded. "Yeah, really." That day marked the beginning of something Lena never could have imagined. Jim helped her find a piano teacher in town, someone who could actually help her develop her skills, not just teach her how to play, but to truly express herself through music. Lena's life started to change in ways she couldn't have dreamed. Every day after school, she would rush to the diner to practice, and over time, her confidence grew. She wasn't just the girl who had to beg for food anymore. She was a musician, a piano genius, with a future ahead of her that was filled with possibilities. Jim, who had started out as just a diner owner, became her mentor, and the diner became the place where she began to find her way. And so, Lena's story, once one of hardship and struggle, turned into a tale of hope, talent, and determination. All because she had the courage to ask for something as simple as food and, in return, gave the world something far more valuable. Thanks for watching. If you were as shocked as I was, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more unbelievable stories like this. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Until next time, stay aware and stay tuned.